As you may know, Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy is a regional land conservation organization comprised of Bloomfield, East Granby, West Hartford, and Windsor. Our mission is to protect open space and promote public appreciation of the natural environment across the region. If you're not a member, we encourage you to go to our website and become a member to help us conserve land in our region. Dr. Cheah has been working on this specific type of work to save the hemlock trees since 1995. I heard her speak at a program 4 years ago, and I was so inspired. I immediately reached out to her and started looking for patches of hemlock trees where we could help the trees through her program. She is a research entomologist at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. She's based out of a facility in Windsor and has worked to find a biocontrol agent to combat the hemlock woolly adelgid that is damaging our hemlock tree population. She did her first experiments locally at Northwest Park in Windsor and has since worked with the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy, Farmington River Watershed, and many other conservation organizations in our area to combat the woolly adelgid here in Connecticut. Without further ado, here is Dr. Cheah to speak about her work, successes, and the future of saving our hemlock trees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was very kind introduction. Everybody, I thank you tonight for tuning in. I appreciate it, especially since it's dinner time. So I hope everybody will settle back. I'm happy to share with you what has been a 30-year journey for me. I first started as a postdoc at the experiment station, and the little beetle that you'll see right there on the slide there has been my life's work here at the station, because it is a native predator of the hemlock woolly adelgid, which is plaguing our hemlocks not only in Connecticut but from Maine to Georgia and even west to Michigan. I just give a little background on why we care so much about protecting our eastern hemlocks. The amazing thing is the eastern hemlock is a very long-lived conifer. It is actually the most abundant conifer here in Connecticut. It actually just recently outpaced the white pine, and it is actually our most prevalent conifer, native conifer. It is also frequently called the redwood of the East because it is very long-lived. In fact, the record that I could find in the literature was it was a tree that they had cut down, and they counted the rings, and it was 988 years old. So you can see most of the old growth hemlocks are probably several hundred years old, and we don't have a lot of those left, but we do still have some in Connecticut. Just a little background, you can see that eastern hemlock has a very large range through down the spine of the Appalachians. You can see it way up there in Canada. See if my cursor will work. There we go. So we've got the Canadian provinces, the maritime provinces, a lot of hemlock all the way down. This is basically the Appalachian spine. And we even have a tiny remnant population at very high elevation. I believe it's about 5,000 to 6,000 feet up in Alabama. And then you can see that eastern hemlock continues westwards. It's all around the Great Lakes area. So it's a very important species, as I'll show in the next slide, especially for watershed protection. Now, hemlocks are very important because they are incredibly important for wildlife communities, for birds, for fish, amphibians. Here in the state, our northern spring salamander, which is down there in the corner there, it is a threatened species, and it can only survive in very cold, clean, clear waters that are shaded by hemlocks. So these brooks are, there are not many of them in the state, but the northern spring salamander is a very important amphibious species. We also have many warblers. Those of you who love birding will know that many of these species of warblers need obligate to breeding in our hemlock canopies. This picture here is of one of those beautiful northwest creeks up in the Mount Riga area. And we also, for those who love fishing or just love nature, our native brook trout are similarly dependent on these really clean, cold waters that only the hemlocks can provide. So our eastern hemlocks are actually quite threatened. In the last century or so, we have actually seen the rise of these two exotic insects. So these are insects that are not native to our hemlocks. And because they're not native, they can really severely damage the hemlock's growth and survival. So on the left here is the one that I'm going to be primarily talking about, the hemlock woolly adelgid. You can see its appearance. Right now, actually, is a very good time to see them on the trees because each little white puffy ball represents an adelgid, which is up there. You can see up there, there's the adelgid without its wool. And the life cycle I will go into in a little bit. And then the second insect that I'm not going to talk about today is the elongate hemlock scale. And that is a needle feeder. It occurs on the needles. It reduces the hemlock's ability to photosynthesize and causes this very yellowish, sick-looking appearance. So the major stresses on our eastern hemlock here, I'll just talk really about Connecticut, but it's same for everywhere where hemlock is found. Drought is actually the most important abiotic threat because hemlocks need cool, moist conditions in order to thrive. They're often found in ravines, sometimes on ridge tops, and often in the low valleys, and especially along riparian areas, in the riparian zone along streams and rivers. So anytime you get an extended drought, and we have actually gone through several droughts in the last 5 years, this is very stressful to the hemlocks. And when drought occurs, we have a native insect over here called the hemlock borer. Now this is a native insect, and there the young man is showing the size of the larva in there, and that is very similar to like the ash borer. It riddles it. The larvae will mine their way through the hemlocks, and oftentimes you'll see just a dead hemlock with a lot of bark chips at the bottom. That's not hemlock woolly adelgid, that's due to hemlock borer. But the problem is that when you have a lot of pressure from, say, the adelgid or the adelgid and the scale, the tree is then weakened, and that's when opportunistic hemlock borer comes in and can kill the tree. Just to give you an idea of how widespread this problem is, the first mention of hemlock woolly adelgid in the records was in the early 1950s, about 1952, and it was found actually in Richmond, Virginia, at a private arboretum. We think that's where it started. It could possibly have been introduced more times also, but at least that we know it started in Virginia. And you can see in 1952, and look at where it was in 1997. So just to explain, the green is the range of eastern hemlock. The brown represents counties where hemlock woolly adelgid has been found to have established. The most alarming thing is that in the last 7 years or so, it's now fully established in southern Nova Scotia. So you can see the progress. Started off down here, and now it's spreading, and it's continuing to spread west. We have populations threatening hemlock forests in Michigan. What happens when we lose our hemlocks, or when we see the hemlocks you'll get warmer stream temperatures because other trees are just not capable of producing that thermoregulatory effect on our streams. So that will affect brook trout survival. If you lose the hemlock crowns, if you can see over here, there's a lot of needle loss, dead trees. That reduces the habitat for birds that require these conifers for breeding. And you also get a lot of nutrient loss because the hemlocks do bind the soil together. And then you're going to get nutrient losses to soil water, more contamination. And it's a cascading series of effects that is quite serious. Just to tell you where hemlock woolly adelgid came from, all these genetic studies have shown that the hemlock woolly adelgid that occurs all along our eastern US is actually from Japan. Now, there are adelgids elsewhere in the world. There are adelgids that occur in China. There are adelgids that occur in the Himalayas. But because of the genetic analysis, all the adelgids that we have here in the eastern US all derive from southern Honshu Island. So that's quite incredible. The other thing that's incredible is that I'm going to talk mostly about one of the Hemlock woolly adelgid's major predators from the very same region, from southern Honshu Island. And so it's this little lady beetle here called Sasajiscymnus tsugae. It's a very tiny little lady beetle. It's only about the size of a sesame seed. It's all black, very difficult to see, and they like to cling to the foliage. But here are some examples of what they look like under the microscope. That's the adult. That's a mature larva. That is the eggs, and the eggs are impossible to see. You cannot see the eggs because they discreetly stick them into the foliage and into the crevices, and that's a pupa. So just to explain how the beetle is very much in synchrony, I'm going to show you the life cycle of the Hemlock woolly adelgid. So we're currently right here. We're in this period right here, developing adelgid nymphs. The adelgids actually go dormant during the summer. You can see this part, and that's why many times people say to me, I don't even see any adelgids on my trees in the summer. And then suddenly in the fall, they start to see all these little woolly masses appearing. And that's because during the summer, when the adelgids settle on the thing, you see how these little tiny specks are there? That they don't spin wool, they don't feed, and so they're really quite invisible to the naked eye. But come the fall, usually in late September, early to mid-October, when the temperatures get cooler, these little nymphs will start feeding again. And then you start seeing these little puffy white balls occur. And then, most interestingly, the adelgid is one of the very few insects that actually feeds and grows right through the winter. Now, when it's really cold like it is right now, they just pause. But if we get a little bit of a thaw, or if we get a little bit warmer temperatures, like in the just above freezing, they'll start feeding again. And then they continue to do so, and then they produce lots of eggs, which is over here. And that's usually about March or April, depending on temperatures. And then when they hatch, this is how many of those little crawlers, each one of those little crawlers, and each female can produce about 250 eggs in one of those woolly masses. Each one of those will then go through the cycle again and produce more. So that's why you can sometimes see a very light infestation in one year, and then suddenly the next couple of months later it'll explode all over the tree, and that's the reason why. And another interesting fact about the adelgids is that they're all females. They do not need males to mate, so they reproduce asexually and produce all these. So there's nothing really that really is limiting the expense of the population of the adelgids, because they just produce lots and lots of adelgids, and only winters or perhaps some severe drought might affect them. But really, naturally, there's no native insect here that really concentrates and feeds on them. That's why the adelgid can just get out of hand. So let me show you a few more pictures from under the microscope. You can see what the little nymphs look like. Here are the little crawlers that hatch out, each one of them. That's what they look like when they start settling. And then that's how when they grow bigger and bigger and they spin that wool. The wool actually protects all the eggs. The eggs are inside. This is a water repellent waxy material. So here in Connecticut, we've actually dealt with the adelgid for nearly 40 years. I mean, this is amazing. The first report that was the first adelgid that was brought into the Connecticut Ag Station in New Haven was in 1985. And at that time, it had been infesting in the mid-Atlantic states, but really a lot of people didn't think it was a serious problem because their hemlocks were still alive. However, when we got the adelgid here, my predecessor, Dr. Mark McClure, decided to look into it more carefully, and he was the one who actually established that the adelgid could kill hemlock trees in as little as 4 years if all the other stresses were there, a drought and a poor site, a poor growing site. And so by 1988, you could see just in 3 years, it had spread all the way up the Connecticut River corridor. The last bastions of hemlocks that succumbed to the hemlock woolly adelgid were in our coldest pockets, so in the northwest corner and the northeast corner. By 1997, almost all our towns were infested with hemlock woolly adelgid. Because I speak to a lot of young people, sometimes I wanted to show them what it was like when I first started at the station in the 90s. It was a very, very sobering time because there were a lot of trees dying, a lot of people were removing hemlocks. The MDC cut thousands and thousands of hemlocks around their reservoir system in West Hartford. That's a Reservoir 6 reservoir system. Look at all these pictures are actually from the MDC up here. You can see the thinning crowns, and over here all the salvage that was going on. This is along the Connecticut River. So this is along the Connecticut River near Gillette's Castle. A lot of those state parks, such as Hurt State Park, Gillette Castle State Park, they had to close some of their parks to remove the dead trees, which are then a hazard. So I just put these headlines. They're all from the Hartford Courant during that period, just to emphasize how very serious the problem was. In fact, most people were very pessimistic and they said we would lose all our hemlocks. So enter the Connecticut agricultural experiment. I am right here at this moment talking to you in that room right there. This is our headquarters here in Windsor. We are a small substation, a research farm of about 50 acres, and we've been studying, initially rearing the little lady beetle, and then releasing them into the forest and trying to follow the impacts. This is actually the insectary. We don't have a lot of funds here, so this little underground bunker is actually where I still am 30 years later, and where we reared all the beetles that we released in the period from 1995 to 2001. We reared about 176,000 beetles, and we spread them throughout the state. So we call this program biological control because we are using another organism to suppress the pest organism. I'd like to stress too that we are very, very careful about this. We don't just release any predator out there. This little lady beetle is very, very host specific. It only will eat Hemlock woolly adelgid and maybe eat some other adelgids, but other adelgids are also pests on other conifers. They do not eat anything else, and I actually did a lot of those initial experiments to be able to prove for federal authorities before they would grant us a permit to release the beetles. So I felt that they were very safe, and I think history has shown us that in the 30 years we've been doing this, we haven't had any complaints about the lady beetles being a problem. Just a little background. I mentioned that it's from Japan. The life cycle in Japan is very similar to the life cycle here. This lady beetle, I'll show you in a little bit the life cycle, but it is actually active from spring through fall. And the most key thing is that because we had a lot of success with the early releases, the program went nationwide, and we actually have this is the only biological control predator of Hemlock woolly adelgid that is commercially available. So it's being reared by a company in Pennsylvania called Tree Savers, and because that technology that we developed here in Windsor, that we transferred to other states and to other labs, it is the only one that you would be able to buy or acquire somehow through funding to be able to treat your beetles without using dangerous chemicals. I just want to give credit to all the folks that I worked with from the 90s and the early 2000s. That's Dr. Mark McClaw, who really was the linchpin of all the hemlock studies. He's long retired now, over 20 years. And these are some of the young people who have worked throughout the years, rearing the beetles, which is a huge task, and also helping us do the research in the field. Just to have a look, that's the situation where we were rearing the beetles. That's our farm manager who's long retired, and that was him renovating this little bunker in the ground where this beetle was reared. So I mentioned to you that the Hemlock woolly adelgid is synchronous with the adelgid, and that's why I think, the lady beetle is very synchronous with the Hemlock woolly adelgid, and that's, I think, is the key as to why I think it is quite effective. So the only time this red circle represents the time when the beetle is active, and you can see the only time it is not really doing anything is the winter. So it's right now it's in an obligate hibernating state, They're hiding in crevices in the forest. And then come the spring, when I showed you when those adelgids start producing their egg masses, that's when they become active. Now they are, because they come from Japan, southern Japan, they do like warmer temperatures. So I actually think that they will have no problems with our warm, hot summers that are increasingly getting hotter and hotter, because I've actually done some trials where I put them out at 90 degrees plus, and most other insects will not survive that high humidity and the high temperatures. But hemlock woolly, the predator Sasajiscymnus tsugae does survive them very well and continues feeding. Just to show you, this is the lady beetle adult, and there it is, eating all stages. It will eat any stage of the adelgid that is out there, and that's their secret power. They do not need a specific stage like the eggs. They do love the eggs. They love it. It's one of the big snacks there, but they will eat anything else. And therefore, their predation period is a very long one, many, many months. And then also their larvae, so these are the offspring of the lady beetle, they also eat all stages of the adelgid. You can see them, they're snacking on every single thing. Even a small thing will attack a big adelgid, or it'll eat a crawler. So there again, it's a two punch a predator. Both the adult and the larvae will be feeding on all stages of the adelgid all the way through, even during the summer on those little dormant instars. So it has 2 generations a year, which is very much in sync with hemlock woolly adelgid, because hemlock woolly adelgid also has 2 generations a year. The long winter spring generation followed by a shorter summer generation. And the other thing I was able to do was actually I went up in a couple of times in a bucket trap with the help of the Connecticut Deep and also Asplin, and I was able to show that while we could not recover the lady beetles from the lower crowns, that is something up to about 6 or 7 feet that we were sampling with the beat sheet, I was able to find them 60 feet up in the crown with their larvae. So that just shows that the beetles were spreading out throughout the forest, going up into the crowns and feeding away and reproducing and doing their best to suppress adelgid population. Now, one of the big factors that is very relevant to us here in the Northeast is the effect of our winters on hemlock woolly adelgid populations. I've been doing a lot of research on this, and with climate change, we're not getting as severe and long winters as we used to get, but we are getting some very interesting events, such as the polar vortex that's actually occurring right now to the west and south of us. Why does it matter? Because the adelgid is feeding in the winter, and when we get a sudden Arctic outbreak, what happens is that as adapted as they are, these adelgids are vulnerable to these sudden cold outbreaks. And when I mean cold, I mean really cold, and I'm talking it takes sub-zero temperatures, not 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but 0 degrees Fahrenheit and below to start having any kind of effect on killing the adelgid. So in this picture, you see this is a tip that I picked up, say in April. You can see where they're really small, those are the adelgids that were killed. But there are some that survive, and they will continue to grow and develop and produce eggs. So the big fluffy ones are the survivors. So you can see that if a winter is really severe, it can have a tremendous effect on its own of naturally reducing the population. However, the ones that survive, because of the reduced competition, can actually produce even more eggs. And so it's not enough to just have winter kill, because the next generation will come back in a big way if we don't have something to control them. Now, I mentioned that although we do not get long cold winters as we used to get, we do get these polar vortex instances where the Arctic air just suddenly plunges down into the lower latitudes. We've been having this quite a lot in the last few years, actually, in the last 10 years or so. But as you can see, we escaped it this time. Our neighbors to the west of us did not. So you can't rely on winter impacts alone, obviously, because we just don't know where that finger of cold is going to come down. This is the jet stream, the boundary of winds that keeps the polar vortex is the cold Arctic air up here. It separates the cold Arctic air from the lower latitudes. And then when you have instability in the jet stream, this is what happens. The jet stream starts getting, they call it wobbly. It starts getting all these loops and curves and wobbly things. And that's when that finger of cold comes down. And that's what happened. This is a dead adelgid. These are all dead. So just looking at the hemlock itself, the hemlock tree itself, you still see the white fluffy wool, but you have to do it under a microscope to assess whether they're actually dead or not. So this is a rough look at the impacts of our winters on hemlock woolly adelgid populations in our state. So northern Connecticut is the light blue, dark blue is southern. This was a simple, just cut the state in half and look at what's happening in the north and the south. The reason being that our winter temperatures are often much more extreme in the northern half of Connecticut. So you can see up and down, up and down. We've had several winters where it was really cold, but then we have some that were like so warm there was actually negligible winter mortality of the adelgid. So in 2023, the next slide I'm going to show you. Oh, I'm not going to show you. I'm going to show you a little bit of the Arctic because I'm very interested in what's happening up there with the lack of with the loss of sea ice, and a lot of scientists in this field have determined that this is a terrible feedback loop, that the more ice melts, the more dark water is exposed, the more warmth is absorbed, and therefore more ice melts. Now, one would think what's happening up there shouldn't really be affecting us, but it does, because now they're able to link that this warming of the Arctic, which is now 3 to 4 times faster than in the lower latitudes, weakens the jet stream, that wavy, wobbly boundary of cold and warmer air. And that's driving these sudden outbreaks, or conversely, plunging warm air during the summer down to us. So let's go on to the next. And I want to show you, this is a combination of a lot of work on my part, where I went out and sampled all over the state in all the 3 climatic regions and determined how many adelgids were killed during each winter, and able to come up with this graph. This no, it's not a graph, but it shows you the critical temperatures in each of our climatic regions that's required to kill 90% of adelgids. So we are probably in this area right here on the boundary, the northwest corner. These are zones that are established by NOAA. So these are official climatic zones. So you can see that in our area here, it needs to go to about -8 Fahrenheit, and we didn't reach that in the last recent cold snap. We're really in the low single digits, maybe around 0. And even in the northwest corner, it has to be significant cold. It has to go down to -11, and along the coast, which is our warmest air zone, it needs to go down to -6. So you can see that we do need to have very extreme sub-zero temperatures. But the incredible thing is that it doesn't need to be a long, prolonged cold. It needs to just reach that temperature even for a couple of hours. And that's sufficient to kill many, many adelgids. For example, I like to bring this up because 2016 was the warmest winter. It still is the warmest winter on record for Connecticut in terms of average temperatures. But it's also the highest mortality of adelgid that was killed during that cold polar vortex that occurred during, I think it was February 14th. That's right. It was February 14th, 2016. I myself live in the northwest corner, and my furnace failed, and it went down to -20 at my area, and it killed a lot of flowering fruit tree buds, and I tell people it also killed a lot of beetles. This is the highest mean mortality we've ever seen throughout the state. But as I said, adelgids have a funny way of coming back. So our most recent polar vortex event was in 2023, again in February. We had this plunging cold, and we got a very good kill. It wasn't as high as in 2016, but we got roughly about 90% mortality over the state. However, we were able, thanks to my one of the people I work with up in Norfolk, that's Susanna Wood. She actually found a lady beetle. This is her picture. that survived that cold outbreak. And they also have a weather station right there. So this is like the incredible proof that at minus 17 Fahrenheit, this lady beetle, because it was hiding in some crevice, survived it. So I do think that pretty much tells us that the beetle can survive these polar vortex outbreaks. So what do we do though? Because the adelgid is not always evenly killed in our region, and it's constantly reinvading, whether by wind or by birds or by mammals or by humans, continually coming into our state. So we have an issue here. Many of the other states use chemicals, and I feel that they are using them maybe not judiciously, because they're using them along rivers and streams and lakes. They're using neonicotinoids such as imidacloprid and safari, which is dinotefuran. And these neonicotinoid chemicals, though they are more recent and less impactful than the other chemicals of the past, they do actually kill quite a lot of insects, and may be indirectly affecting the ecosystem by killing off, for example, lots of little caterpillars that the birds need and that sort of thing. So here in Connecticut, because we are very concerned about the effect on our pollinators, there's a restriction on the use of neonicotinoids for chemical control, whether for adelgid or anything else. So if you want to use chemicals, you have to get a licensed arborist to apply them. However, I want to also show people that we can do something else. We can use biological control. We can use those little lady beetles to safely reduce the adelgid population. So I'm not going to launch and tell you here of the exciting collaborative approach that we've developed here in Connecticut. I think it's something that many people could use in their own states. But anyway, tree savers, here is the reason we're able to do this. This is Jamie, who is Jamie, actually I should change her name. It's Jamie Cabrera now. She's the director of Tree Savers. She's been rearing beetles for close to 20 years now. Commercially, this is their setup. And in 2024, I was able to go down and visit the lab, the new lab that they had, and help retrieve beetles and bring them back here to Connecticut. But they had a huge overproduction because there's so much adelgid. They were not short of food, so they were rearing so many. They reared over 300,000 beetles. They sold probably about half of those, but then they had to donate. They actually donated thousands of beetles to anybody who is from a nonprofit agency or something like that in many states, in just asking for the shipping. Now, the beetles are expensive. They're very intensive labor, but I think that they are well worth it, because you can do something about the adelgids on your trees without resorting to chemicals. So I developed this, it kind of all came together. This is the exciting part that I want to share with you. I've been working with many, many different partners throughout Connecticut. These are just some of the ones that I've been working with. I've worked with the towns of Glastonbury. I've worked with the town of Woodbury, my own town of New Hartford. I've worked with many land trusts. That's Southbury Land Trust, Simsbury Land Trust, the Trap Rock Ridge Conservancy. When before with Jennifer, it was the East Granby Land Trust. I've worked with private forests. I've worked with Audubon societies. We have so many people who are anxious to do something about the hemlocks that are dying on their properties. I even worked with a rock climbing club here in Southington. They were concerned because the few hemlocks they had left were all dying. So we actually did a release there. So I'm excited because this is very amazing to me that we have no money. We have no money to buy these beetles. I have no money. I can only share my expertise and volunteer my time. But because we were able to find funding from certain organizations, we were able to implement these beetles throughout many riparian watersheds. And I want to show you this now. So right here is a container. I'll just show you this. This is, if you bought this from Tree Savers, this is what you would get. You'd get 100 lady beetle adults in a container. Now, roughly that costs about $300. I know it's very expensive, $3 a beetle, but each one of those beetles, if it's a female, can produce about 250 to 300 more progeny. So if you release them at the right time in early spring, they'll be able to produce a second generation. And we hang them out in the forest on infested hemlock. That's all you have to do. Put them out onto the infested branches, usually heavily infested branches, so they get to reproduce right away. And I've also worked extensively with our own state foresters. They have been wonderful partners, and the state parks too, because we don't use chemicals in our forests. Quite amazingly, we are very, very unique. All the surrounding states, all the way down to Virginia, Tennessee, they all use copious amounts of insecticide out there. They use imidacloprid or they use dinotefuran by spraying the bark. We do not use any of that here in Connecticut. I'm really proud of our foresters, whether they're private or not, private and state, because they have embraced this method of going out there and releasing beetles to suppress the adelgids. It's especially important for water companies because they are prohibited from using any chemicals at all. And believe it or not, all these little streams that fill the Buckhamsted Reservoir are lined with hemlock. So they have a lot of hemlock death in those little riparian corridors. The trees would fall down into those ravines and clog up the water. So it's a serious thing. And I'm grateful that the MDC and also the South Central Regional Water Company, which is the water company around New Haven, have all embraced this method of trying to control adelgids. But I have to say that my hat is off to the Wild and Scenic program. We are so amazingly fortunate that we have this beautiful Farmington River and Salmon Brook as the nation's first partnership wild and scenic river. So this is funding, federal funding that supports the protection and preservation of our wild and scenic rivers. And we are one of the first in the nation to have this. And I've been funded by the Upper Farmington committee, the Farmington River Coordinating Committee, and then a couple of years later by the Lower Farmington Committee, which protects the Lower Farmington and Salmon Brook. And together we have released in so many towns. This is just an overall view to show you, but here we are, we're up here, and here we are. We've released all the way from Heartland down to Windsor through the funding that is provided by the Wild and Scenic program. So what happens is they buy the beetles. I propose the areas that we needed to protect, get all the partnerships together, whether they're the towns or land or even commercial properties, even utility companies. And then we go out and we release the beetles and we do it all together. So the very first part of in 2021 was the start of my partnership with the Upper Farmington. And these are all the various people who come out and help release. Literally, we're releasing them on hemlocks right along the Farmington River or along the tributaries. And this, I am continually amazed. So this is the cumulative number of towns and cumulative number of beetles that have been released. So this was a period when we were funded by the Forest Service, and we were rearing our own and releasing our own. So we didn't have anything. We didn't have any funds to buy anything. Then there was a pause. There was no money. I had no people to work with me. We had a pause for nearly 10 years where we didn't do anything. And then suddenly I got this opportunity because Jamie from Tree Savers donated a couple of thousand beetles to me to do for research. And then I suddenly found that if we could get funding and buy beetles from them, we could actually expand our releases. So this is how this exponentially has gone up. In the last 7 years, I believe, since 2017, the first donation, we've released over 121,000 beetles in addition to the 176 we had. So I'm proud to say we now have over 300,000 beetles released throughout the state. So just to show you, because this is the region that the Trap Rock Ridge Conservancy would be interested in, we have done a lot of releases here in Farmington River Park, Windsor, Wildlife Management, and Northwest Park is of particular interest to me because that is such a large band of hemlocks that you would never expect to find in such a heavily populated area. I'm continually amazed, and we work a lot with Simsbury. Simsbury has a lot of hemlocks too, and we've extended up here and in McLean game refuge, and of course the state forests around us. We even have releases that I was able to conduct last year with Eversource. They are actually very keen on this program, and they participated for the first time last year. So let's closer look. Here's Northwest Park. A lot of hemlock aligns this area, and we were able to do some releases here. Many years ago in 1995, the very first release of this beetle was at Northwest Park, somewhere in here in the interior. So it was lovely to be able to go back 20 years later, and actually there's still a lot of live hemlock. I don't know if it's because we released some beetles there, but there was still a lot of hemlock that we wanted to protect. And here is the area I just did some assessments. The Farmington River Park, this continuous belt of hemlock that curves all the way along here up into Northwest Park. It's truly amazing. And so together with all the volunteers from town of Bloomfield, from the Land Trust, it was wonderful. We had this was last year in 2023. I'm sorry, actually 2 years ago now. And we went out and released over 1,000 beetles, and we put them all along the river. And then Jennifer, you'll recognize our efforts there in East Granby. Also did the Galasso property, which overlooks Terrace. And we were able to release quite a few hundred beetles there. So, you know, it's something that's amazing to me that we are able to do this. I wanted to show you this. So I have not been able to put in the 2024 release sites, but this just shows you in 1 year, because of the funding from the Lower Farmington Salmon Brook Wild and Scenic Committee, they bought 10,000 beetles for us, and we just spread it all along the tributaries. So some of this is the Upper Farmington group, but then all these are the lower Farmington group. So together, I think we have such an amazing story to tell, because we're now releasing in 5 and 9, 14 towns in a variety of properties and trying to save hemlocks throughout this region. That's the Upper Farmington folks. So here we are. Here's the summary site. So here you can see all the releases. There are 4 years of releases here and 2 years of releases here. And I'm hoping to apply to both Wild and Scenic committees for further releases in 2025, because I've been going out there and the adelgid, unfortunately, because we had a very warm winter, coming back strong. So here's the overall state where we've done our releases. So the very first releases are these big red things where we would release 5 to 10,000 beetles per site. So this is the period 1995 to 2001 when we were doing our research, and we had all the young people helping us rear beetles and assessing them in the field. And everything since, these are all collaborative releases. Many land trusts also find funds within their own budget to release beetles and save their hemlocks. So some of these are self-funded, some of them are from the Wild and Scenic, and I intend to find as many conservation type grants that will allow us to continue this. And just so you see why I'm inspired to do this, these are the original sites where Sasajiscymnus was released when hemlock woolly adelgid was so rampant back in the 90s. These are all historical 20, 23, 24, 25-year-old sites. And you can see they still have a lot of hemlock. Now, some of the hemlocks are continuously being ravaged by adelgid. So recently I tried to do some very, very small introductions, but the majority of these sites, there are 26 sites. Sorry, there are about 17 sites I follow. I actually have not received any new beetles until only more recently, and only in the low hundreds, just seeding a few more beetles in. I feel like it's like a booster that you maybe after 20 years, they deserve a little booster of fresh beetles. So wherever I can, and I've got the state to buy some beetles too, but the state often doesn't have funds for that. We've been able to do that, and we've kept these forests going. I just wanted, before I end the talk, I just wanted to show you how hemlocks shouldn't be written off too easily. They're very resilient species. Many people will see the hemlocks looking poorly, like over here. So this is the Colebrook River Lake. This is the MDC property. It's the start of the Farmington River. and very important reservoirs. There are a couple of reservoirs up there. And so this is a totally inaccessible stand. It's very steep. So the MDC hasn't been able to cull any of those trees. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go back and photograph these trees. So the July 2015 was the start of a very, very serious drought, the second most serious drought that we've experienced, because it lasted for about 11 months in the northwest corner. It lasted for nearly 2 years along the coast. And as a result, you can see all the trees looking very poorly. And then in any situation, one would have cut those trees, or rather the arborist would have told you to cut your trees down. There's no way they're going to come back. But look at that. We got heavy rains in 2018. And that's why I say drought can be a killer in itself, but rains can be the savior. Look at them coming back. The same stand coming back all green, very few of them dying. And then I was able to go out in November to show you that that same stand is persisting. So many years later after looking so poor. So sometimes we just have to trust the hemlock trees that they can come back. So we didn't do any beetle releases here, but we did release just downstream at the start of the Upper Farmington. So I just wanted to show you, to encourage people that with a little bit of rain, maybe a few beetles, we can bring our hemlocks back. So with that, I'm going to close. I have so many people to thank, but I mainly want to thank the Farmington River Coordinating Committee, the Lower Farmington Salmon Brook Wild and Scenic Committee. I also want to thank the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, because for many years I was I survived on only getting federal grants, and in the interim, when the U.S. Forest Service stopped funding me, NIFA, which is the USDA National Institute of Food, they funded me and kept me going. And I wrote my research project based on this, on trying to find a way to help use biological control to save our hemlocks. And because of them, I'm here today, and all the partners that I've been working to, and tree savers. And with that, I close, and thank you so much for inviting me to give you this talk and share my passion with you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Cheah, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
We've got quite a few questions in the chat, and I will go ahead and start asking those.
Sure.
First, from Martha Rollman, she wanted to ask if you need to release the lady beetles twice a year to correspond with the life cycle of the
adelgid.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
No, you don't need to. It is preferable to try and release them in the early spring once the danger of freezing temperatures and frost. Now, you can't always ensure that, but I tend to think that most times in early May along the southern part of Connecticut, sometimes even end of April, and in mid to late May for the northwest corner, because we still get some really cold periods. It's the best time to introduce the beetles if you can get them. But if you can't get them at that time, it is fine to release them anytime forthcoming, because as I mentioned before, there's the lady beetles will eat any stage of the adelgid out there. So, I'm sorry, start my video.
Okay. No
my apologies. So you can release them anytime. So for example, for this year, when we got the donation, it was way past the period when the adelgid was active, but because I'd done the research and showed that they could eat all those little dormant nymphs, I said, go ahead, just release them, because the number of nymphs that they can eat is several thousand. If you started counting all the ones they eat from July into October, and that's several thousand less that will produce those egg masses. So again, Martha, yeah, you can release them at any time of the year that you can get them, but it's preferable to do it in spring, because the ones that are released earlier in spring can have a second generation to attack the second generation of adelgid.
Excellent. Our next question is from Mercedes Large. She says, about 10 years ago, an arborist checked the trees on my property and explained the problem with the dying hemlocks on the property. At the time, he said the way to address the problem was with a series of injections of something. I did not accept the treatment because it was around $10,000 a tree.
Oh,
Wondering if you knew what that product was and if it would have worked. And she also stated it's nice to know that there's a beetle to address the disease instead.
right. So 10 years ago, it probably must have been imidacloprid, I think, because that's about the time that it was actually it was more than 20 years ago. I actually did some experiments with my colleague with imidacloprid. Yes, it would have worked. It would have been a little slower to take effect. It would depend on how healthy your tree was at the time of injection. Because what they're doing there is they'll inject the insecticide down near the roots, and it's a systemic chemical, so it's absorbed by the roots and it goes up into the tree and has to travel through the tree up into the branches, and then imidacloprid would have had a very long lasting effect. We actually, my colleague Dr. Coles and I did a lot of experiments on that early time, and he was able to show that the residual effect of imidacloprid could last beyond 5 to 7 years. So it would have been quite a long-lasting effect. But there again, as you mentioned, 10,000 per tree or whatever it was, that sounds a little high. But it would have been, you would only save that particular tree. The treatment will only save the tree that you're applying it to. It won't save a forest. So I have serious misgivings when I hear of other states getting funding and applying uh, using a bark spray. They'll go through with a backpack spray and start spraying trees. But I'm sorry to say that the residual insecticide remains in the tree, in the needles, and there's natural needle drop. So when those needles fall and are shed naturally, whether they're dying from insect attack or not, that's going to be incorporated into the soil. It's going to be washed into rivers and streams. There's no telling what's going to end up with that kind of spread of chemicals. So yeah, so hope that answered the question.
Excellent. Martha Rollman, we own 160 acres in a steep gradient watershed in Western Mass in a sub-tributary of the Connecticut River.
Yes.
We know that many loggers' feeling is to cut out all of the hemlocks. This is not our approach, and we do not share their opinion. What is your suggestion as how to talk to foresters and loggers who just want to cut all of the hemlocks?
Yeah, that is a very serious problem. I understand. I know it's more prevalent. It's not so prevalent in our state, thankfully. And they call it salvage logging because basically the opinion is that once the hemlock starts declining, it loses its timber value. I think that would be a tragic mistake to salvage cut such a huge area, especially if it's sloping to the river. My suggestion would be to try some biological control. I mean, if you can't, you don't have to be right down there to release them. If you can find some accessible trees at the top of the ridge or maybe down by the river that have adelgid, just introduce the beetles if you have the funds to do so. You know, the beetle is available to the public, and you don't have to pre-order early. But I think there's no harm in trying biological control. I mean, we never thought it would succeed in many of our forests, to tell you the truth. And it's only because I've survived so long that I can go back and I can't believe the same trees that I released on nearly nearly 30 years ago are still alive. Some of them are still alive and thriving, some of them. And that totally astonishes me. So I would suggest try some beetles, and the best time to try it would be after we've had a natural reduction of the adelgid, like from winter kill. So right now, I think Massachusetts would still have had some suppression of the adelgid from the 2023 polar vortex. So this spring, I'm starting to see resurgence in many areas, but it's not overwhelming yet. I would think this is an excellent year to try something like that. I'd be happy to help if you need more information.
Excellent. Excellent. Our next question is from John Schuster. And his question is, do you know of any efforts in Massachusetts to release the lady beetles?
Yeah, well, Massachusetts is in collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service, and they have chosen a slightly different path. So there is a little bit of interesting, well, let's just say a divergence of opinions. We do the lady beetle here. I do it because I've worked with the other beetle that is from the Pacific Northwest. I have not worked with the flies, the little silver flies. My feeling is the Sasajiscymnus is so accessible to everybody. Now, the Forest Service funds a different program where they use two different predators, what they call a winter predator and a summer predator. But you see, the numbers of those predators, they're not able to successfully rear a lot of them. So therefore, they're not all available to the public. I mean, they distribute them, say, on state lands, on land trusts, certain selected clients, but they're not available to not everybody who asks for those predators will get them. Whereas with this program, even though they're costly, I think we have a track record of showing how we've maintained our hemlock in Connecticut. In fact, Connecticut's hemlocks have now exceeded the number of growing stock trees have actually exceeded what was in 1985 when the adelgid came in. I think that's proof in itself. So they do a different tack now. I don't know if because in Connecticut I hold the federal permit to import the beetle into our state. I still don't really understand why we need a permit because we've been releasing for 30 years without a problem. But apparently we need a permit. I hold a permit and I've already stated in my permit that my permit covers everybody in the state who wants to use it, whether they're private, state, working with me or not working with me. So we have many homeowners who do it too. I just keep a tabs on it so I know what towns get beetles, etc. So I think there was a movement in Massachusetts to have a general permit that would include Sasajiscymnus, but I think you need to contact your Massachusetts state forest health specialist. And my feeling is that if they try to discourage you, just persist and say you want to get these beetles. So, do you have a permit and let me import them through your permit? That's how I feel that you can do it. Now, interestingly enough, Maine is a great partner. I've worked with Maine for many years on and off on different projects. They have seen the value of this lady beetle, and so they also have a very similar program to mine, where the land trusts or the conservation commissions or the towns, they get the beetles and they release, and their forest health, the Maine Forest Service entomologists work with them to assist them to do this. So Maine does the same program to a slightly lesser extent than Connecticut, but they're catching up. And I see no reason why folks who want to get this beetle, because it's perfectly safe, shouldn't be able to do it in other Northeast states.
Okay, excellent. And just remind everybody attending, if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat and we will get to it. Our next question is from John Schuster again, and he is asking, how does the adelgid spread from tree to tree, and how does the lady beetle spread from tree to tree?
Okay, so the adelgid, I probably didn't actually mention it, but the adelgid is only mobile. The one that's damaging, the phase that's damaging is only mobile as those little small crawlers that hatch out from the eggs. They can move, but they don't fly. So it's going to be a passive movement. They will spread along the branches, but they'll also be carried inadvertently by birds. They are also spread by wind because other adelgids are spread by wind. They've actually shown that. So they can be spread by winds and they also, I believe, certain mammals like squirrels and such like running around, jumping from tree to tree. I'm sure they're carrying a few adelgids on their fur. So it's a passive spread, but it is I do think that winds must be a major way in which the adelgid is spreading so quickly, because so suddenly I've seen it myself. I check a stand of hemlocks and it looks like it's very low population, and then suddenly it explodes in a matter of a few months for the summer. It's all over around the whole pond. And how did that happen so far? It can't be like the birds all brought it all in. So it's passive. Now the lady beetles, they spread because they fly. Those little lady beetles, those little black adults, they fly and they fly very well because especially if you see, I found them 60 feet up in the tree and we released them in the low branches. So they fly readily and they would be the main means of dispersal would be their own flight and they're probably carried by wind currents too.
Okay, excellent. Denise Kamer is asking, would it be beneficial to buy a set of lady beetles and release on her property hemlocks? Would they multiply or would it not really be that beneficial for her?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to try out and see if it would work would be if we could only release very small numbers because we can't afford thousands and thousands of beetles, obviously. So if a homeowner has, say, an acre of hemlocks, I've actually tried this on my own property. I didn't buy the beetles, I reared them and did them as an experiment. And I had such a severe infestation, I thought it was retribution on me or something. And I said, okay, let's try this. Let's see if this will work. Because I too was a bit skeptical. But because the lady beetle has a really innately high rate of reproduction, if you put it out in the right time, that's why I mentioned early spring when those egg masses are full, your say you got a container of 100 lady beetles, you would then have hopefully about 50. It's about a sex ratio of about 50-50. It's a random thing. But then you'd have 50 beetles, and then each beetle, let's even be conservative, and let's say the 50 beetles were able to produce 100 eggs each. By the end of that, and even if you lost 50% of it, you get 2,000, more than 2,500 beetles from that one initial purchase of 100 beetles. So I think it is very effective. I mean, the thing is to release them out there. And in my case, what I did was I did 100 beetles. I have 3 acres of hemlocks in the swamp, so I did 100 every year for 3 years, and then I haven't done anything since. And I've had a pretty good reduction of adelgid. I had some winter kill as well. I mean, the winter will kill some of the adelgids in the cold areas, but it seems to me it's quite a good way to go because even if you were to get, say, a horticultural oil application, that's going to cost you several $100s, and you have to do it every year. And if you don't want to do it near water, you don't want to do it near water, I stress. And if you were using neonicotinoids, I wouldn't put them near any well. So I think yes, I do think that if you can just start the beetles off, and if you have the adelgids there, they can self expand their populations.
Okay, perfect. Monica Jekyll had a very similar question, which you just answered, and Monica, I would recommend reaching out to Dr. Cheah
Yes,
to
please
learn
reach out.
more about purchasing the beetles or getting some beetles for yourself. An anonymous attendee has stated, about 18 or so years ago, the DEEP spent months at Penwood State Park clearing, cutting huge swaths
Yes.
of hemlocks in order to control the HWA. Was that a last resort prior to the use of the beetle?
Yes, actually, I do recall that. That I remember the salvage was all occurring. It was pretty horrific. Now, the reason, say, the MDC or DEEP had to cull some of those trees is because they were deteriorating so fast that they were becoming a hazard because they were all, there are very many trails that go along, and the MDC was definitely was scared about falling trees, killing people or maiming people. So partially it was a response to that. Also because the Connecticut Deep saw the devastation that occurred along the Connecticut River Valley in the 90s. Westwood Trails is a very famous example. It's down in Guilford. They had to close the whole area and cull all those trees because they were all dying or falling down, etc. So a lot of that times it was due to the hazardous nature of the dying hemlocks. You don't see that so much nowadays. I think it's been a subtle change in the philosophy, and that's why I really welcome the partnership with them because you don't see them doing this anymore. Even some place like Devil's Hopyard, which was ravaged by hemlock woolly adelgid in the early days, we did a major release there, 10,000 beetles, and we still have pretty good hemlock stands there. We do have to do a little bit of touch up here and there, but I think that my feelings that it doesn't hurt. It can only help, because if you're going to reduce some of the adelgid pressure, you give the tree a fighting chance to come back.
Excellent. Mercedes Large has said, initially when the invasion was noticed, nothing was done to address it because no trees were dying. Within a few years, trees were indeed dying as a result of the invasion. Are you on the lookout now for other invasions and thinking of ways to address them before there's so much damage?
Mercedes, do you mean of the hemlock woolly adelgid, or invasive insects in general?
I think we'll see if she
Right.
reposts in the chat in a minute.
Yeah. If it's adelgid, yes, I do. I keep I'd say 80% of my time is out in the woods. Either because I'm surveying, or even when I can't get away from it. I take a hike and I have to look at the hemlock. It doesn't matter where I am, and nature, uh, land trust, or MDC, or whatever, I just have to see the hemlocks. So yes, if it's regarding adelgid, yes, I do. I follow it. I'm trying at this period now to assess some of the releases we've done in the Farmington River watershed, and I'm always constantly looking for new hotspots. My feeling is that we have an opportunity after those big winter kills to address any emerging hotspots. We just don't want to go back to the 90s. That's my feeling. I don't want to go back to the 90s and see this mass mortality. I want to snuff out the adelgid where I can. And if it takes a few hundred beetles at a time, that's fine. It's better to do something than not to do anything. That's my feeling. And to partner with anybody who wants to do this, um, is my goal.
Mercedes did respond. She actually said both to the question. So I guess
Oh, so she meant other invasive insects too.
as well. Yes.
Yeah. So because of the nature of my research, I confine myself to hemlocks. I have other colleagues at the station who do monitor all the other different species of threats. I mean, we have scientists who are working on beech leaf disease, which is not an insect, it's a nematode that's killing our beech trees. And then I have another colleague, Claire Rutledge, who has been doing a lot with emerald ash borer. And we have, I'm not sure that anybody's specifically working on spongy moth, which was formerly called the gypsy moth, but there's a natural control out there, which is a disease, the pathogen that can kill those. So I think at least I can speak for the state agencies, that would be Connecticut Deep and our agricultural experiment station. We do monitor potential threats. Like one of the potential threats is not particularly a forest pest, but spotted lanternfly is definitely of concern to the agricultural field, and they are
We're we're
monitoring.
we're, we're seeing the spotted lanternfly on the trees of heaven, and we've worked to cut down some of those trees to reduce their food source.
Right. And the tree of heaven can actually be a kind of sentinel tree because they like it so much. You might be able to monitor an area by having, say, a trap tree and see if it gets infested with a spotted lanternfly.
Okay. Excellent. Martha Rollman, this is she's just commenting. This has been a very informative presentation. We are extremely concerned about the hemlock decline and encouraged about Dr. Cheah's work. And thank you very, very much for the presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Martha. It's my pleasure. Thank you for your response.
Our next question is from Bet Harderson. What's the size of the lady beetle in relation to the ladybug?
Okay, so the ladybug, I wish I had my little, oh, maybe I do. Just 1 second. Let's see if I can have my, oh, I don't have it here. Let's see. I did not think to have my little show and tell here. So the lady beetle, which is a ladybug too, is just a small cousin of those big orange and black ladybugs. I would say that the Sasajiscymnus tsugae is about the size of one of those large dots on the wings of the larger lady beetle. That's how
Oh,
small they are. They're
they're
really
tiny.
Yeah,
small.
they're like a speck, almost like a
Yeah.
speck of pepper.
Yeah.
They're very
If you
small.
think of sesame seeds, they're about the size of a sesame seed. So you can have 100 crawling in a little container, but once you let them go, good luck trying to find them, even if you just released them 10 minutes ago. It's really hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got one more question in the chat. If anybody else would like to get in and ask a question. This is from John Schuster. Northfield, Mass is on the border with New Hampshire and Vermont, and
Okay.
I'd be interested to hear about efforts in these states as well.
Yes, the efforts in these states, probably it's best to contact your forest health specialists in your respective states, either New Hampshire or Massachusetts. You can find them on the state government websites. They would know best what they're doing in your particular region. I suspect it would be something like a mixture of chemical control. They do use chemicals in these states, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, particularly, and New York. They're big on the chemical treatments. So they would probably be using chemical treatments. They would probably be using a mixture of, if they have enough of them. I don't know how they distribute in the different states. They would probably be using the Laricobius beetle and the silver flies if they do any biocontrols.
Okay.
And maybe mixing the two together. I'm not even sure they do that in the same site, but they might be.
All right. Well, that is the end of the questions. Dr. Cheah, I want to thank you. That was very informative, and it was also encouraging, right? Because a lot of times we just kind of see the negative way things
Yeah.
are happening, and you've shown that there's positive ways to address this, and you've seen some actual really positive results, which is
Thank you.
just very encouraging.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Um,
go visit your state forests, your land trusts, preserve, and if there are hemlocks there, you saw how many we put out beetles. You'd be amazed how many of the hemlocks do look a little better, I hope. And I hope it'll continue to be like that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting me. I've enjoyed it a lot. So thanks very much for being so patient. Bye,
well,
Jennifer. Thank you, Matt.
thank
You,
you all
Dr.
very
Cheah.
much for coming, and we've
Yes.
got another presentation on coming up on February 5th on the nature at the Wittenberry Hills Golf Course. So please join us for that. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully this recording will be available sometime in the near future.
Thanks
Thank you
so much,
everyone. Have a
everyone.
great night. Jennifer, have a
Yes.
great night. Dr. Cheah, thank you
Thank
again.
you. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New
Thank
Year,
you.
everyone.
Okay.
Take care.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.